Hello and welcome to the Warframe tier list. Today we'll be going over Saryn, and first things first, let's go into the builds. With Saryn, I have two separate builds that I like using. This first one is Roar, as Roar buffs her first ability Spores to make it deal additional damage on top of just buffing your passive weapon damage, which you already have a lot of thanks to Saryn's Toxic Lash. Not only this, with this build, once you have a single yellow Archon Shard for Energy Orb efficiency, you can drop Flow for any other mod you like. You could run something like Cunning Drift for 15% additional range, as Saryn scales exceptionally well with range, or if you just want another passive buff to apply to yourself and your team, you could instead run Venom Dose to give your attacks innate corrosive. The second build is a Nourish build, and Nourish opts to keep her second ability Molt instead of getting rid of it in favor of Miasma. With Roar, I find keeping Miasma to be better, to still have a way to mass AoE spread viral, and to have a button to CC enemies around you to increase your survivability a little bit. That being said, you still, even with the Roar loadout, could drop Miasma in favor of Molt, as Molt is a good shield gate ability, and it also gives you fake survivability with the decoy, and real survivability by it. I don't know why it's not stated here, but Molt cleanses status effects applied to you like heat procs, so you're not getting cringed down when your rolling guard is on cooldown. Nourish works exceptionally well to spread viral for you for free without having to cast Miasma, and it also fixes any sustain problems that Saryn could potentially face thanks to Nourish giving you an energy multiplier, and combined with combat discipline, every time you kill an enemy you will damage yourself, proccing Nourish's explosion for additional CC for survivability. Both of these two builds work and both are good, and again, just like in the case of the Roar build, you could drop Venom Dose here for anything of your choosing. With this build, you only need Brief Respite and Augur Reach to shield gate with Toxic Lash or Miasma. However, with this Nourish build, you need Augur Reach and Augur Secrets and 2 more Augur mods on your pistol to be able to shield gate with your abilities. These are the two builds that I prefer using on my Saryn. As to the weapon loadout, you can really use anything you want in the primary slot. The thing that I actually liked the most was the Torrid Incarnon. Even with only a 0 forma build, the Torrid was killing enemies in the Steel Path easily as Saryn. But realistically, you can use any weapon of your choosing, as Saryn just passively kills enemies with their first ability or Spores, and buffs the crap out of your guns thanks to her passive, giving you 25% additional status chance for Slash, Gas, Heat, Electricity, whatever you end up using, Toxin, and just her third ability Toxic Lash, just also buffing your damage on top of her first abilities, Augment Mod, Venom Dose, giving you so much corrosive damage. So again, use whatever you want. Same thing applies to the secondaries, though I would recommend the new core, as just the new core is good on Saryn. The downside is if you're running the Nourish build, you do have to run a build with 2 Augur mods. For the melee, again, use whatever you want, though I was just using the Praetos for the 30% parkour velocity and the 20% sprint speed. As to the focus schools, I was using Madurai, mostly for the 50% casting speed when using the Roar build, as Miasma has a pretty lengthy cast time and you want as much casting speed as you can manage without neutering your build, and of course the 40% ability strength also helps. And last but not least is the Companion, and as Saryn I actually use the Sly Vulpaphyla instead of the Panzer. The reason I use the Sly Vulpaphyla over the Panzer is because the Panzer spores consume the same slots as Saryn's spores, meaning that in very rare circumstances, your Panzer can consume all of the spore slots, making it so your Saryn spores don't spread and you can lose your stacks. So I just use the Sly, though it is very niche, so you could just use the Panzer anyway if you want, though I do use the Sly. Now moving on to the rankings, we're discussing Saryn in relation to 4 separate topics. Firstly, her KPM, secondly, her survivability, thirdly, her viability, and finally, how fun she is to play. All of this data is sampled from a 1 hour solo Steel Path bot run with no specters, no on-call, and of course no Archon Shards. Now speaking of the first topic, Saryn's KPM, and I feel like this really shouldn't have to be said, Saryn has incredibly high KPM. Saryn is the Warframe in the game that is consistently capable of the most KPM out of every Warframe in the game. That being said, in the past year or so, there are now more ways to get close to Saryn's KPM, and some frames, such as the Mirage Nuke 4 build, can sometimes actually do higher KPM than even a Saryn, though they are a lot more inconsistent, and that is Saryn's big key. She will always consistently get high KPM no matter what the tile set is. The only issue that you can run into as a Saryn is if you're playing in a public squad and there is somebody else nuking, or if you're just playing in a public squad and people are hallway warrioring everywhere and nobody's like even remotely at the same place, as then there just won't be enough enemies for your spores to spread to. But other than that, like Saryn is just consistently incredibly high KPM, and she used to be the undisputed queen of KPM and queen of DPS, just full stop. And to an extent, she still is, though. Again, like I just previously mentioned, the bridge has been closed a lot with a lot of different frames, so she's not as good as she used to be relatively, but she's still easily an S+ for KPM. Now moving on to the second topic, her survivability, and this is also something that has technically gotten worse over the past few years. See, Saryn sports high base armor and higher than average base health. The problem is, nowadays, that isn't enough for her to actually survive, as the damage in this game is starting to get kind of absurd that the enemies are dealing, and the fact that she doesn't have any innate DR means that running a health tank build on her is kind of bad. A lot of people used to use Gloom on her, and I'm sure a lot of people still do use Gloom on her, but even that isn't really enough to consistently keep you alive, as enemies will just one-shot you full stop from full health. It doesn't really matter if you're slowing them, all it takes is a single shot to kill you whenever you don't have any form of DR. And not only that, in my opinion, Saryn as a frame can't really run a health tank build without sacrificing too much in her kit. And running a 200+% range Gloom is kind of troll, and honestly, if I was in a public squad with literally anybody running a 200% plus range Gloom, I would probably just leave the squad because it would just be annoying and not fun. And playing her as a shield gate build, her lack of innate CC does lead to you struggling to survive at times, as well as her energy sustain problems if you're running the roar build. But she still can survive thanks to her higher KPM. That is another issue. On a couple other Warframes, I said that how they survive is just their KPM is so high. I'll use the example of Mirage. The problem is, although Saryn gets similar KPM and most of the time higher, she kills enemies in a different way compared to other nuke frames. Most other nuke frames just delete everything on their screen that's actually shooting at them. Saryn just slowly nukes pretty much the entire map rather than instantly killing everything in her line of sight. This means that even as Saryn, when you're getting super high KPM, there will still always be enemies around you shooting you most of the time, meaning that her high KPM really doesn't help her survivability too much. So, at the end of the day, she has slightly below average survivability, which I will put her at a B-. If you keep Molt and run the Nourish build, it is slightly better, but I still think it fits around the B- area. Now moving on to the third topic, her viability, and her viability is decent. So Saryn, like a lot of other Warframes in this game, you've probably noticed this by now in a lot of these tier list videos I say this, she excels mostly in survival. In other game modes, she's good, but she's not as good at survival, and the reason for this is because in survival, you get an endless stream of enemies to keep your spores stacked up. In something like defense, where she works well in lower level defense, in higher level defense, she's not that good, but because between waves you will lose all the stacks on your spores, and the spores just won't deal enough damage. Like even in base Steel Path, Saryn is really not that great for defense missions. She's decent everywhere else though, just because of all the buffs that she passively provides to her weapons, and the fact that her molt does give her a speed multiplier for speed running certain missions. So you can just run through with like an AoE weapon, spamming molt for speed, and then just killing everything with your guns. So she's at least decent there, and again, she's really, really good in survival. Everywhere else, just honestly, kind of average. So everyday missions, slightly above average. Survival, really good. Other endurance missions, kind of average to be honest. I know a lot of people like to run like Saryn for disruption, but I'll be honest, her survivability really just isn't that great in disruption, and most people you'll see running Saryn in disruption are running Vazarin and just spam dashing themselves, or they're just doing something cringe like cloak arrow to keep themselves alive. It's just her survival's not that great. Most people play her just for like clickbait damage, just because she has so many different weapon damage buffs that scale multiplicatively with each other, so you can make like any gun in the game work. And that is why a lot of people play her in disruption. At the end of the day, I'll give her like an A- for viability. It's good, but again, it could be better. Now moving on to her fun, and Saryn was my very first main whenever I initially played the game. Whenever I was new to the game, my brother got me into the game, and he told me to look through all of the different Warframes in the codex and pick one that I thought looked interesting. I went through all of them, and the only one to me at the time that looked even remotely interesting was Saryn. I, of course, could not play Saryn because she required MR, I think, 7 back then. So instead, he told me to pick somebody else, and he would buy me Saryn whenever I was MR7. So I played Trinity up until MR7, and then picked Saryn. I played Saryn for the longest time because she was just incredibly fun. Nowadays, I don't play her too much, but that is just because I already have like 10% usage on my Saryn, despite not having played her nearly at all in the last 3 years. She's a really fun frame. I do think she is slightly less fun now than she used to be, because I do not enjoy playing her as a shield gate frame, as she's one of those shield gate frames where you're shield gating and the abilities that you're using to shield gate don't really do anything. You're just doing it just to shield gate. Like, you're just pressing molt just to reset your shield gate. It doesn't do anything. Even if you're using Miasma, most of the time that you press Miasma, it's not doing anything because either you already casted it, so the enemies already have viral, or like they're already CC'd, so it's not CCing them, or you shield gate with Toxic Lash. It's just, I don't know. And you have to shield gate so much because of her lack of innate CC. I just really don't enjoy playing her as a shield gate playstyle, honestly. And like I've previously mentioned, I think playing her as a health tank isn't that great anymore either, thanks to all the damage creep that the game has introduced with Steel Path and other higher level content. Again, that being said, I do think she's still a fun Warframe, and I will give her a flat A rank for her fun. In conclusion, Saryn is an S- tier Warframe who, in my opinion, is still very strong, though is not the de facto best Warframe in the game like she once was. This is due to power creep for not only our arsenal buffing our weapons and our Warframes, but also the enemy's arsenal getting power crept as well.